this is the Undying Nephilim, and today I'm going to show you guys the next faction that is being added to the game, and that faction is the Lizalfos. They've got a few new gameplay features. They're actually one of the biggest factions in the game in terms of like their unit count and stuff. I'll explain that in just a bit. So I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. I'll go into the details on their heroes when I get to the hero and the Titan video. I'll do that along with the Deku Scrub heroes, but for now, let's just take a look at their faction. So, what are the Lizalfos? They are these crazy reptile creatures. They've been in almost every Zelda game. Most of them are pretty similar, but there's been some dramatic departures on their designs in some games. But for the most part, they're reptiles, and they're found in very hot areas, except with a few exceptions. So in Nephi canon lore, they are from Death Mountain. They used to be the servants of the Volvagian dragons. They had a pretty big empire along all the Death Mountain ranges. They had enslaved the Gorons, and then the Gorons rose and overthrew them. The Gorons wiped out most of the Volvagians, and the Lizalfos were forced to flee Death Mountain. They fled to the south into the Kokiri Forest and eventually made their way to the Faron Woods, which is where they currently are. So they're kind of like this angry, displaced, fallen empire that wants to retake their homeland. They're kind of out of their environment. But anyway, what do these guys have that no one else has? Well, their tech tree works a little bit differently. Most of the factions in the game, you click on their civil center, and then you have the village phase, the town phase, and the city phase. Kind of like in Age of Empires, how you have the Dark Age, the Feudal Age, yada yada yada. Lizalfos don't have that. They are much more like Age of Mythology, where when you go up in age, you pick between multiple deities, and depending on which deities you pick, you unlock a selection of units and buildings and technologies that the other deities don't have. And that is because the Lizalfos have a pantheon of gods. They're actually one of the only cultures in Hyrule that has an explicit pantheon. I mean, I guess you could argue the Hylians have a pantheon because they got the three goddesses, but for the most part, most factions, most of the cultures, they're not exactly monotheistic, but they all kind of have like a patron deity that they worship. But the Lizalfos, they just pick and choose from a pantheon of gods. And they have 6 different ones down here that you can choose from. Well, there's 6 in total, but you can only pick 3. And depending on which 3 you get, you unlock a certain selection of units and buildings. So, the Lizalfos technically have more units, more buildings, and more technologies than any faction in the game, but you'll only have access to about 3/4 of the units and buildings and techs that any given faction can have. But the advantage is that makes them a little more unpredictable compared to most factions. Like if you're fighting against the Lizalfos player, you have no idea which 3 deities they pick until, after they pick them and they start fielding their units and stuff. So they can be a little bit harder to counter, even with really good scouting. And it's currently not in the game yet, but I might even make it so that they can abandon the deities that they've chosen and switch to other ones. So anyway, because you can only choose 3 deities at a time, in order for me to show all 6, there's going to be an awkward cut in the middle of this video where I restart this and show the other 3. But I will start with 3 of them now, and I'll go through the details of all of them. But anyway, at the bottom level, there is Okra, which is this snake deity that has a Lizalfos skull on its head. And Okra is the Lizalfos god of poison, disease, and death. And if you pick this deity, you unlock a few poison-based units, technologies that give them access to poison stuff, like their towers will ooze poison around them and damage enemies that try to capture their towers. if I remember right, the units this guy unlocks are the ropes, the trappers, which are their poison archers. He unlocks a catapult that launches diseased corpses of cows, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, that is the Lizalfos, god of poison, disease, and death, and he is one of 2 gods you can pick at the start. The second one is Dala-gan, which is actually a Volvagian that they worshipped before they were kicked off of Death Mountain. Dala-gan is the Lizalfos, god of the hunt. He gives you a bunch of really fast combat units with really good damage, and one of the units that he gives is the Predator, which has a really good dodge rate. I think it has the highest dodge rate of any unit in the game other than some Sheikah, but he also gives you some fire-based techs, if I remember right. I think he gives you a tech that makes a lot of your units resistant to fire damage, which is pretty great. So, yeah, that's Dala-gan. And in order to unlock the next set, I'll just go ahead and pick one of those 2 for now. And then next up is Farosh. Loosely based on Farosh from Breath of the Wild, but not exactly. Farosh is the Lizalfos, god of secrets and all things hidden. He is a giant Chameleophos with the weird, crazy unicorn horn on his nose. And he gives you access to a bunch of sneaky units, which stealth and camouflage are not in the engine yet. Hopefully I can convince EXO to do that soon. But when stealth and camouflage are added into the engine, this guy gives you a bunch of units based around that. He gives you the Lizalfos that are based on the design from Breath of the Wild, which are the little chameleon guys. And yeah. And then there is Din-Rahl, who is the Lizalfos, god of war and battle. As that title implies, Din-Rahl gives you a bunch of very powerful units that are pretty much only good for combat. He gives you a Din-Rahl soldier in a huge suit of armor. He gives you the Dark Hammers, which is kind of like a miniature siege unit. He gives you some fire-based technologies. He gives you it might actually be the Dala-gan, but I think he actually gives you the giant stone walls if you pick him. So he's pretty awesome. But I'll go ahead and pick, I'll pick the first 2 of each tech level for this first part, and then I'll show you guys the other 3. Anyway, at the top tier, they have Garniel-Og, the Hellmasoor king, and the Lizalfos, god of the forests. The Lizalfos king, or the Hellmasoor king, gives you access to the Titan of the same name. He also gives you access to Hellmasoor units, including a Hellmasoor queen and a giant siege unit. And the last deity in the top tier of their pantheon is Trinex, who is the Lizalfos, god of mountains. He gives you access to the Titan of the same name, Trinex, and he gives you some other giant creature units like the Dodongo snakes, and I believe it's the Heat Toys. So yeah, I'll go ahead and pick the Hellmasoor king. And I will start showing some of their units. Let me think if there's... Oh, of course. Yeah, when you pick the... Sorry, my mouse is being weird. There we go. When you pick your deities from their civil center, it places the little heads of the statues in the front, or the little stone idols. So depending on which ones you pick, it'll display the different ones. So that can kind of help you tell which ones you picked. And if your enemy is doing some really awesome scout work, your enemy will actually be able to take a peek at those and be like, oh, okay, I see which god he picked, and I can kind of base my strategies around that. But anyway, Lizalfos are carnivores, so they cannot gather any berries. They can only hunt. They have no farms. However, they have an altar, which I'll go ahead and build. I'm actually going to have to disable instant build to show what the altar does, so let me finish building it first. the altar is an important building for these guys. So let me disable instant build. So the altar, in addition to having really, really important technologies that they can research, once you're able to build altars, this thing can actually generate resources if you have your workers pray at it. So I'll go ahead and order him or her to pray, and they just kind of dance around it, and they get excited. And it'll generate food in particular, and then there'll be upgrades where it can generate other resources. So Lizalfos don't have farms, but they'll be able to build altars, which will give them food, which is probably the resource that they struggle to collect the most, since they can only hunt. What else? It's not in the game yet, but the altar, you'll also be able to select your units, and then you can sacrifice your units on them to get a refund from resources. So things of that nature. Eventually, the altar will be able to spawn... actually, I think I can demonstrate it right now. If I research this technology, it should be able to spawn animals that you can sacrifice that also generate food. It looks like she's carrying the food back. It's taking a while. But anyway, so yeah, the altar is one of their most important buildings that you can build. And it also spreads territory, but since I put in the kind of master cheat code, I have like maximum territory already. But yeah, these things are used to extend territory. I'm trying to think if they have any other uses. I think that's pretty much it. They generate food, they expand territory, and when it's added into the game, you can sacrifice your units there in order to refund your resources. And yeah, as you can see here, it also has a tech that lets it spawn animals that you can sacrifice for food. But anyway, let me put instant build back on and go ahead and show some of their units, since I don't think they have any other features other than... Nope, that's it. So let me build their unit spawning buildings. Another interesting thing about the Lizalfos is, depending on which deities you pick, their buildings actually appear aesthetically different. Like I picked Okra and Farosh, so their buildings kind of have like this forested vegetation look. But if I picked the Volvagian god and Din-Rahl, their buildings would look more volcanic and have like the red rocky bits around them, which you'll see in the second half of the video when I show the other half of their units. So let me train some of their units. These are all the hero units, so I will show those in the hero video. And let's train these ones. And these ones here. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So yeah, on average, the Lizalfos will only be able to train 11 combat units, as opposed to the, I think, 19 that most factions have. So in the end, they'll have less units that they can bring out, even though they have way more units in their roster than most other factions. Like, they have twice as many units as this, depending on which gods you choose. But I will go ahead and show the ones that I've trained here. Okay, so actually first I'll just show their scout unit, which is the Chameleophos here. The Chameleophos Sneak. Although it looks like I spelled it as skink there, I meant sneak, so I need to fix that. But anyway, the Sneak is just an average scout unit. He's got these little blades on his elbows and a horn on his head. But when stealth and camouflage is added into the engine, this guy will be invisible. He can only be detected by other scouts and detector units like watchtowers. So nothing particularly special about their scout other than the fact that it inevitably will become invisible, which is still a really handy ability to have. But there's no other weird special abilities they have other than that. Other than their ability to become invisible, they are just a normal scout unit. And you can also use them to detect other invisible units. Alright, I picked Okra the Lizalfos, god of poison and death. And Okra gives you ropes, which are these little teeny tiny snakes. They are a very, very weak unit, but they're able to deal poison damage. And they're very cheap to produce. And if I remember correctly, they only take up half a population point. So you can pump out a huge swarm of these guys if you wanted. Go ahead and create a few more of them, I guess. So very, very weak early game unit. I am, in my mind, I'm not sure if this will, it'll probably need some tweaks, but in my mind, their best use is to actually harass workers. If you create like a huge swarm of 30 of them by like the first 5 minutes in the game, and you just send them to poison enemy workers and slowly pick at them, because you inevitably will lose them because they're very weak. But if you're able to kill enemy workers in exchange for these, it's a pretty good trade-off. But otherwise, they're just a very weak early game creature unit. And then the next unit that Okra gives you is the Tree Hopper, which is this lizard right here. With a spear, it's an anti-cavalry unit. When abilities are added into the engine, it'll be able to jump over cliffs and jump across rivers and get to inaccessible areas of the map, but we don't have active abilities in the engine yet. So right now, it's just a very, very fast anti-cavalry spearman unit. And then there is the Trapper, which is this Lizalfos here. The Trapper is a poison archer unit that deals a bit of poison damage, so it can deal damage through armor, which is very handy. There is not a lot of units in the game that have resistance to things like poison, except for some Kokiri units, I think. Kokiri and Korok units have some resistances, or units with magic resistance. They'll take less damage from this, but for most normal units, this archer can deal full damage to them, which is pretty great. So yeah, that is the Trapper. And then the last unit that Okra gives you is the Carcass Launcher, which is this catapult here. When it attacks an enemy, it loads a cow carcass in it, and then it'll launch the cow carcass at enemies. If the cow hits an enemy, it's usually an instant kill, but not always. And if it misses, the cow's corpse will remain on the ground and continue to spread disease to units around it. So I'll go ahead and have this guy launch... I'll have him launch a corpse at the sand seal over here, just so I could show you guys. Let me speed up the game, and then I'll slow it down when he gets over there. Speed up a little more. Alrighty. So it loads up the giant cow corpse, and then it just launches the cow corpse. And it slightly missed, but it creates this giant, this radius of disease around it. You can see its health is slowly draining from that. Even it got hit by the cow. The third shot killed it instantly. But yeah, you can see from this sand seal up here, its health bar is going down from the disease being spread by these corpses. And it took quite a bit of damage from that. So yeah, a really, really handy sort of siege unit. It kind of is a siege unit, but it's not. It's really hard to classify this unit. I might just consider it a support unit, but considering how early in the game you can get it, it's a really powerful unit. It's even better later in the game when your enemy is sending like huge swarms of enemies to attack you. This thing can deal damage to, a bunch of units in a huge area, even though it's not tons of damage. But yeah, really, really, really useful kind of siege unit. I'll just call it a kind of siege unit, I guess. Alright, those are the units that Okra gives you. Next up are the units that Farosh gives you, which are these three Chameleophos units. The first one is the Striker, which, like their Scout, it'll eventually be able to become invisible, so it's kind of like a stealth spearman unit. It's got a suit of armor on too, so it's got some decent armor values for a stealth unit. Most stealth units in the game are very, very squishy and can be killed easily once they're found, but since this guy has armor, he's actually pretty durable for a stealth unit, so that's pretty cool. And since he's got a spear, he's an anti-cavalry unit too. So that is the Lizalfos Striker. Very, very handy spearman unit, especially when we get stealth into the engine. And the next up is the Shaman, which, even though it does have, you know, a pole arm, it's not explicitly an anti-cavalry unit. It's actually a support unit. It boosts the performance of your allies around it, and it reduces the performance of enemies. It can pray at the altar and generate even more resources than the workers. So I can order him to go there. And he has a technology that I think you research here. Let me find it. Yeah, a technology called Revenge of the Gods, which when you research it, he gets this ring around him, and any workers that are praying with him in this ring will generate even more resources from the altar. So that's pretty awesome. So let's see. Yeah, the little icon's missing though. It's that pink box, but yeah, he'll cause them to generate even more resources than they normally would. Since I have instant build on, it doesn't show them really praying. They're just getting the resources and going back instantly. But anyway, that is the Shaman. Really useful support unit that can eventually pay itself off by praying at an altar. I also think when sacrificing things has been added into the engine, instead of bringing your units to the altar, this guy can just sacrifice them anywhere on the map and you'll get some of your resources back. You'll get a little bit of a refund. So yeah, that is the Shaman. I really love his design. He's obviously based on the chameleon design of the Lizalfos from Breath of the Wild, but I added, you know, all the shamanic paint on him and the deer horns on his head and all the feathers, and I really like how his design turned out. I think he's probably my favorite looking unit that this faction has. He just looks so cool. And then the third unit that Farosh gives you is the Poison Spear Launcher, which kind of like this catapult is a sort of siege unit, but not exactly. Its intended purpose is actually to kill giant units and bosses. So if you were fighting another Lizalfos player and they had an army of these big creatures, these things would be dealing double damage to them, or let me see, I think it's double damage. It might even be triple damage. Yeah, I think it's only double damage, but they have a tech that enables them to deal true damage, which is pretty great. So yeah, these are boss slayers and giant creature slayers. Yeah. You can use them to attack buildings, though. They deal decent damage to buildings, so they're still kind of a siege unit, but they're best used against huge creatures like this one and that one. Anyway, I think that's... Oh yeah, and also it deals poison damage, so that's pretty awesome. But I think those are the only features this unit has. I feel like there's something else it does, but I'm forgetting. I think that's it. So those are the three units that Farosh gives you. The next deity that I picked was the Hellmasoor King, which gives you these two units right here. The Hellmasaurus Ram and the Hellmasoor Queen, which is this really awesome creature here. The Hellmasaurus Ram I'll talk about first. It is a living battering ram, so it's a siege unit. It's pretty slow, but it's really, really good at attacking buildings, obviously. Since they don't really have dedicated siege engines, this is one of their two siege units that you'll want if you pick this deity. Obviously, if you don't pick the Hellmasoor King, you'll probably want to pick one of the other deities that gives you a siege unit. But yeah, Hellmasaurus Ram. Just kind of a normal living battering ram. You can upgrade it to deal splash damage, to give it some punch against units, but otherwise it's a dedicated building killer. The next up is the Hellmasoor Queen, which should be doing it, but I must have disabled it for this video by accident. She actually is supposed to spawn a bunch of small baby Hellmasoors that follow her around. And she herself is kind of slow and is not particularly powerful for a unit of her size, but she's still, you know, pretty strong, all things considered. But whenever she is slain, all of the baby Hellmasoors that she spawned go kind of insane and deal tons of damage and go on a rampage. So she's kind of just like a bulky melee unit that actually is more valuable when she gets killed in battle. And then the little babies that she spawns will go on a rampage, which is pretty great. So yeah, that is the Hellmasoor Queen. And then the last unit, which does not require a particular deity. You'll actually get access to this unit no matter which deities you pick. It's a late game unit though, and it is the Lizalfos, the ones from Twilight Princess. They got a sword and shield. They're a flying unit, so they can go over any terrain, but unlike most flying units, because they have a shield, they're actually not vulnerable to arrows, so they're actually they're really hard to kill, unless you have mages, basically. Ranged mages that can attack from a distance are pretty much the only thing that are really good against them. Archers can obviously still kill them, their damage is reduced because of their shield. However, these guys, their attack isn't particularly strong. They're on par with like a normal infantry unit, so they won't be dealing tons of damage, but the fact that they're so mobile and they're so resistant to ranged attacks makes them very, very valuable as a late game soldier. And if I remember correctly, they're not that expensive. Yeah, they only cost 35 food and a little bit of metal, so they're not particularly expensive. They're only a little bit more expensive than I think these guys right here, which are kind of like a normal armored soldier. Alrighty. Before I switch over to the units that the other deities give, I guess I'll show the Titan. Since one of the deities you pick is basically the Titan, it's probably safe to say it is the Hellmasoor King. I won't go into details about what it can do until the Hero and the Titan video, but I'll go ahead and show him after the wonder is done. So yeah, there he is, the Garniel Og, the Hellmasoor King, one of my favorite bosses from A Link to the Past. I actually think to this day that's the hardest boss in that entire game. I think it's even harder than the Mothula with the crazy floor. I don't know why, this boss just was always really hard for me to kill, but it has such a cool design. But I'll go into detail about his special abilities in the Hero and Titan video. But if you pick him, the wonder that it gives you is the Eastern Palace from A Link to the Past, which is the same dungeon from that game that he's from. I really like how this particular building turned out. It's pretty much the design of the Eastern Palace from that game, but I kind of, because the Lizalfos architecture is quite obviously Mesoamerican, so I added certain details to it to kind of give that Mesoamerican vibe to it, even though the design in A Link to the Past already shares some similarities to Mesoamerican architecture, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, that is the wonder if you pick the Hellmasoor King as your third deity. So there'll probably be an awkward cut in the video right here, and then I will show you guys the other three deities and the units that they give. So I'll see you guys in just a second. Alrighty, and we are back. So I will show the other three deities. Let me just put an instant build, and then I will pick all three of them. Alrighty, now that I've picked the other three deities instead, I'll go ahead and show the units that they give, but as you can see there in their ziggurat, the heads are different because I picked different ones, which is pretty awesome. But anyway, let me build their buildings again. So there's that one, and that one, And that one, and I think that is it for their buildings that train units. But yeah, as you can see, even though these are the same buildings, because I picked different deities, they have slightly different aesthetics. They kind of have like the volcanic rocks around them to harken back to Death Mountain. So, I'll go ahead and show the units that these ones give. Let me just train them all. Alrighty. And this one actually doesn't train any. This is all the hero units, so I didn't really need to make that building. But anyway. Alright, so first up is the Dala-gan, the Volvagian god. Gives you these 4 units. First is the Predator, which is this guy right here. He's an early game infantry unit with the sword. He is the design from Ocarina of Time, which was my personal first exposure to a Lizalfos. Like in that game, they have an extremely high parry, or they have an extremely high dodge rate. Actually, it says it's just 15%, which is kind of low. I'm going to up that, but they do have a technology that doubles their dodge rate. But yeah, in the end, these guys will have like the highest dodge rating of any unit in the game, other than some Sheikah units. So they'll be very, very useful early game. Even though they don't deal tons of damage and they don't have a lot of HP, because of their high dodge rate, they'll be able to avoid a lot of melee attacks, which is pretty awesome. So you'll want to bombard them with arrows and things like that. Or splash damage. They can't dodge splash damage. So yeah, that is the Predator. And then the second unit that the Dala-gan gives is the Hellmasoor Tracker, which is the only cavalry unit that the Lizalfos have. They actually are very, very terrible when it comes to cavalry. They have very bad selection, even though they have a bunch of really good creature units that kind of makes up for it. But in terms of just pure cavalry, this is the only cavalry unit they have, which is, yeah, the Hellmasoor Tracker. It's very, very durable and has very high HP for a cavalry unit, though. So despite the fact that it's small and doesn't deal tons of damage, it's very resistant. And they have an upgrade that lets them have a chance to stun enemy units, so that's pretty handy. If you have a huge swarm of these guys charging into the enemies and you have the stunning shockwave researched, I think it's a 25% chance that they'll stun enemies for up to 3 seconds, which is really, really useful as a late game ability. So yeah, that is the Hellmasoor Tracker. The third unit that the Dala-gan gives them is the Din-Rahl Butcher, which is a really, really beefy early game melee unit. When abilities are added into the engine, he'll be able to periodically shoot fireballs, because the Lizalfos have no mage units at all, so being able to deal fire damage will be really really handy for him. Actually, I take that back. They do have one mage unit, but it's one of the hero units. But I'll get to that in the hero video. So yeah, that's the Din-Rahl Butcher. And then the fourth unit that the Dala-gan gives you is the Monitor, which is this guy right here. He is the Lizalfos commander unit. Like all commander units, he boosts the performance of everyone around him, and there's a technology that allows him to dance around and increase the speed of Lizalfos around him, kind of like the Goron Drummer, except the Goron Drummer doesn't need research to do that. He's also an early game unit, so he's one of the only early game commander units. I think the only other faction right now with an early game commander unit is Ordana Province, so really, really useful early in the game if you're going to boost your army. But anyway, those are the 4 units that the Dala-gan gives you. Din-Rahl, on the other hand, gives you some of their best combat units. These 3 right here. All 3 of these units are really, really powerful for what you're paying for. The first one is the Din-Rahl Footman from Twilight Princess. It is just a Din-Rahl in a heavy suit of armor with a shield and a sword. Obviously, he has very high armor stats. He's very resistant to ranged attacks. You pretty much just need magic to kill these guys really fast, or anything that deals fire damage will kill them fast. Excuse me. Poison damage will kill him. Yeah, any kind of magic damage is good against them, but normal melee attacks and arrows, they're pretty resistant to them. And if I remember right, they have a tech that makes them resistant to knockback, so even knockback won't be very useful against them. So yeah, that is the Deities Footman. Next up is the Hammerin, which are the Lizalfos warrior princesses armed with this giant hammer. They have a tech that makes them resistant, completely immune to knockback, actually, and they deal knockback damage too. So they are a very, very powerful unit that can disperse enemy crowds and send their units flying around everywhere. And if I remember correctly, they're immune to being stunned too. I might be misremembering that, but I don't think they can be stunned by enemies, so that's really, really useful. And then third up is also one of my favorite Lizalfos units, the Dark Hammer, also from Twilight Princess. This guy is awesome. He's a very slow-moving unit. He's extremely heavily armored, so he's very hard to kill unless you have magic. But he's actually classified as a siege unit, so he's very, very good at damaging buildings. I mean, he's really good at damaging units too, but he's better at going after buildings. You might be surprised to know that his attack actually doesn't deal knockback. His attack stuns enemies instead of dealing knockback damage, so unlike most units with a ball and chain, he does not deal knockback, but his stunning, I think, more than makes up for that. And his ability to tear apart buildings. I haven't decided yet, but I think he'll actually have a damage bonus explicitly against towers, so he might be a tower killer. But right now, he's just a general siege unit. So yeah, that is the Dark Hammer. I have no idea why Nintendo called them Dark Hammers, since they don't wield hammers. Alright, that is all of Din-Rahl's units. Next up, I will show the two units that Trinex gives you. Those two units being the He-Toys and the Dodongo Snake. The He-Toys was one of the mini-bosses from Spirit Tracks. I think it was a mini-boss. It might have been an actual boss, but I think it was just a mini-boss. But yeah, there's the He-Toys. The He-Toys is a very, very durable unit, but its main feature is that it can cross bodies of water, and it'll also be able to cross bodies of lava too. So it's kind of a naval unit, even though navies aren't in the game yet. But obviously, bodies of water are in the game, so it's still useful for crossing rivers and lakes for the time being. And as I mentioned, it's very, very durable, so it has very high armor values. You pretty much need magic to destroy it, or just tons of soldiers to slowly chip away at it. It has pretty high health too. But yeah, that is the He-Toys. One of the cooler units, one of the only designs from Spirit Tracks that I don't absolutely hate, even though it's basically just a tortoise with weird designs on its shell. But yeah, that is the He-Toys. And then I'll come back to it after it goes in the lake. Actually, you know what? I'll just show it going into the lake first, and I'll speed up the game, and then I'll go to the next unit. There. So yeah, it can cross bodies of water. It actually looks like I set it to float, but it should be sinking under the water. I don't know, maybe Exo and maybe I'll bother him about getting swimming animations into the engine. Because right now, none of the units have swimming animations, because there's no real functionality for that in 0 AD, but think like a year or two ago, I talked about it with EXO about adding swimming animations. I'd really like to do that so that all the aquatic units look like they're swimming. In particular, all the Zora. So right now, he just walks on water. When I release this publicly, he'll probably walk on the bottom under the water. Inevitably, though, he'll swim around in the water, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, that is the He Toys. Anyway, I will go ahead and show the last unit that Trinex gives you, and that is the Dodongo Snake. These truly bizarre creatures from Link's Awakening. Obviously, I made a few slight design changes because the creature from Link's Awakening is literally just a blob with a mouth, or two blobs with a mouth. So I made them a little more snake-like to kind of be reminiscent of Trinex himself. These guys are just a very, very slow creature unit that has a damage bonus against creatures that are smaller than itself. So it does twice as much damage to like normal size creatures like this, and I think it does triple damage to really tiny, or to like small size units like Kokiri, or what are some other examples? The ropes that the Lizalfos have, he'll be able to do triple damage to those. I'm trying to think of what other things this guy has. When abilities are added into the game, he'll actually be able to burrow underground and become invisible, which will be really handy. So he'll be kind of like a stealth unit. Oh yeah, he's able to go over cliffs and mountainous terrain and stuff, but there's not really anything like that on this map, so I can't show it like I have some of the other units. But yeah, he'll be able to climb over cliffs and mountains and stuff. So he can get almost anywhere on a map. As long as it's not rivers. But I guess you can use the He Toys for things like rivers. So yeah, that is the Dodongo Snake. He's got pretty decent armor, so the best thing to use against him is magic, obviously. But I think that is it for the Lizalfos units. I'll go ahead and show the wonder that Trinex gives you. And I'll show you Trinex himself. If you pick Trinex as your final deity, the wonder that he gives you is, I was going to say Dragon Rock, but it's actually Turtle Rock from A Link to the Past. I believe it also showed up in A Link Between Worlds also. So yeah, there's I keep wanting to say Dragon Rock. Turtle Rock. And I'll go ahead and show Trinex, which is one of my favorite Titans in the game. Even though I like the Hellmasoor King better as like a creature and better as a design, I think this is just one of the coolest Titans in the game. I won't go into details until I do the Hero and the Titan video, but I'll go ahead and show him. As I often do in these videos, I'll show the Titans before I go into details. So yeah, that is Trinex, one of the two Titans that you will be able to get access to. So yeah, that is the Lizalfos faction. I'm trying to remember if there's any more features they have. I think that's pretty much it though. I went over all their deities. I showed you the altar and how it works. I mentioned that they can only hunt animals to get food. They actually do have a structure they can build late in the game that generates food. It's called the Grub Growers. It basically grows a bunch of maggots that they can use to get food. It barely generates any food though, so it's more like an emergency kind of thing when you're really low on food and you don't have a lot of workers to pray at an altar, but you have enough wood to build several of these. So you can build those to generate food. That's the closest thing they have to an actual farm, I guess, but it's not an early game structure, so they're not really as useful as farms because you can't get them till pretty late in the game. I think that's pretty much it though. They actually have an ability where when any of their units dies, it gives a very, very slight and temporary boost to the stats of all units around them. That's actually a pretty important ability. And I think that's it though. I went through all the features that they have. The most prominent feature of theirs is being able to pick between the different deities, which gives them different units. And you can pick them in different orders too. So I picked 3 in particular for the 2 halves of the video, but you could pick, Okra and then Din-Rahl here, and then Trinex, or Okra and then Din-Rahl, and then the Hellmasoor King. You can mix and match them to get different unit compositions and kind of throw your enemy off guard, which is really, really cool. At least I think it's really cool. So they're very much an Age of Mythology faction, very literally, because in Age of Mythology you picked the different deities, and it's basically just ripped off straight from that game. You pick the different deities, and you get certain units and stuff. But anyway, that is the Lizalfos. If you are a patron, as soon as you watch this video, you'll be able to download these guys immediately. If you are not a patron, I believe I will be releasing the Lizalfos and the Deku Scrubs on Christmas. If you can't wait until Christmas to try them out, just become a patron and you can download them as soon as you're done watching this video. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm pretty sure that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If I forgot anything about the Lizalfos, I'll show it in the hero video for the Deku Scrubs and the Lizalfos. I should have that up sometime in the next few days. I'm probably just going to spend the next few days fixing bugs that the patrons find, and I'm going to make 2 more maps. I'm going to make a Faron Woods map and a Deku Scrub themed map. And I'll probably have a trailer showing these guys in the next few days, and the Deku Scrubs. But yeah, hopefully you guys like the way the Lizalfos look, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun playing as them when they come out. So stay tuned for the next video, and I hope you guys all have a good one.
Hey, listen!